Matan, thank you for joining me today. We've never actually had a chance to chat and hear your story, so I'm excited to get to know you as a colleague. But why don't you take a second to introduce yourself, tell us who you are, what you do, and
Yeah,
take it from there.
for sure. Matan-Paul Shetrit. I work on the product team here at Writer. Um, and, everything, the product design, working very closely with the marketing team on the go-to-market of our offering, and really trying to crack what it means to build agentic and scale for enterprise.
Yeah, there's no playbook for this. I mean, I would imagine that there are some precedents in terms of experience and enterprise integrations and all of that kind of stuff. But this is really unknown territory. But you are somebody who, from looking at your career path, you go into very new territory. It looks like you studied game theory and economics, and then you worked in wine marketing and as a tasting officer at a winery. And I would love to know what took you from point A to point B, and if that's something that you're bringing to your work in product.
Totally. So it's funny, like wine, wine runs in the family, I guess, for lack of a better term. I grew up in Israel, and my family, from my mom's side at least, is they came to Israel at the 19th century, and they've been growing wine and grapes since then. The extended family, so it's something that always was in the background. And when I was 18 and I needed a job before going to military, I just started working in the industry, and it just stuck. And at first I would do, how sometimes you go, I don't know, to a supermarket in the States and you have these samplers that give you like free samples. So we would do like wine samples. And over time it grew to working directly with the wineries themselves, and as well as magazines, to do the wine tastings you do for wine critics, which is a fascinating world. It's, I would argue, maybe one of the most corrupted things I've ever stumbled into, because like you take a person to, I don't know, a three Michelin star restaurant, and you wine and dine them literally, and they know that if they write a bad review, they're not coming next time. So
Mm.
there's like these really interesting terminology that's being used in the industry by, I would call it, the industry experts, to indicate that your product is shit without calling it shit. So it's kind of like we're all playing this game while you're like transparent within that echo chamber of the industry externally to customers. If you don't know what you're reading and like fine comb, go through the wording, you might miss. Now, there's obviously, like in every industry, like a bunch of these like critics that they're at this point so well known. So it's kind of like they run no risk to not be invited. They might actually not come to you if you even invite them. But I think overall, it's like it was a very interesting experience, and also showed me the power of marketing and the word when it comes to like getting your product out there and making sure people want it and love it, like, and how language and what matters.
Well, I can appreciate that a lot. And it's also, yeah, there's veiled, euphemistic, nuanced language in every industry that, only speaks to the insiders. Now I'm curious actually what that sounds like in the AI industry. But where did game theory come from? What made you say, huh, this is something I want to unlock?
Yeah, totally. So I growing up, I was always interested in econ, and I actually thought I want to be in academia. And more than that, I knew that I wanted to work in the public sector, at least as a earlier in a career. So, I did my undergrad in math and econ. And when I actually started school in Jerusalem, we had it's a public university, like most universities in Israel, and there was a big strike. Um, for about 6 months, the first 6 months of the year, there was no school. We had like maybe 10% course load. So I had to find a job. So I found a job and I joined the Ministry of Finance, which was kind of like the dream of job that I wanted to have post school. And through that, I, made certain decisions and like worked most of that 6 months, stayed there for about 4 years in the public sector, specifically working on, social security and healthcare policy. But I think, which was not what I would, if you would have asked me up front, hey, do you want to work on social policy? I'd be like, no, what are you talking about? But became very fascinating because that combination of, econ, math, game theory, I felt like was a really important component of that experience, because I was able to take a lot of that theory from the classroom into the workplace. So, for example, when I was there, um, I spent about I would say 3 years out of my 4 in a corner office that no one had access to, because we were working on restructuring the Israeli social security system. And people were terrified. In the US, it's called the third rails of politics, because they were like,
Hmm.
well, if this leaks, we're all screwed. So let's put this, 21-year-old to start working on this, because if this fails, we're going to throw this guy under the bus, basically. Um, which on one hand is like terrifying if you think that you're letting any 21, 22-year-old do anything like that. But I guess it kind of makes sense from a political point of view. But through that experience, we then build, I guess, the equivalent of a blue ribbon committee with industry experts. And I had the opportunity, because like one of the lessons there was, when you build these things and these models and this agenda, you don't go to a committee without like, and that's true for any government, I think, and almost any company. But it was an eye-opening experience where when you go to this kind of committee, you don't leave it to chance. Like, we kind of knew, I would say 90 to 95% of what we want to achieve from it. And
Hmm.
then a lot of it was theater and getting like the right players in the room, and like,
Right.
and again, we things have changed on the margins, but I think that was like, okay, what does it look like to, negotiate between the central bank and the national unions and the doctors association, the nurses, the hospices, the hospitals, because this has immense impact on
Hmm.
on the full social safety net. And this was like, if university was game theory and math 101, this was like, okay, this is the advanced class of where theory breaks, where the theory breaks and like the pavement
Right.
meets the road kind of thing. um and it showed me, and I think that was the first time that I started like really thinking, without knowing what to call it, the value of being like a product person. Back then the product was policy, but it was still product. And it's like, okay, this is, you sit, you design this, you think through, the incentive structures, how people behave, what's the impact. Yes, in this case, it has massive scale, because you're talking about old age benefit, child benefit, healthcare. But and I think that and that product was this report or this recommendation. But I also think it taught something to me that might not show when I'm in all hands or talk to people in the company. But it's also the level of humility, which is, even if you think a system is broken, um, there's like a method to that madness of the system. Like, there's a reason things were designed the way they were. It might
Hmm.
not be relevant. It might be that you can do it better. But I think, I think the assumption, which I see a lot in the Valley in general, is we know best.
Hmm.
And I think this is why something that I really love about what we do at Writer, which is, yeah, we might be closer to the technology, but you didn't stumble into being a Global 2000 or a Fortune 500 by chance. Like,
Yeah.
like no one trips and falls into being a global dominant company. So, and I think coming with that perspective was like, obviously you know what you're doing in your industry. Let's bring that knowledge together with the tech capabilities to build something, you know, almost like something magical, something new, something unique. And I think that's like the right level of humbleness plus kind of like push the client that is required
Yeah,
in enterprise.
I this brought up a couple of questions for me, and I want to go down different paths with you. First of all, the whole game theory, like when I hear game theory, that the first thing I think about is incentives, right, and how to influence human behavior through incentivizing behavior.
Hmm.
um, and I can see how that translates into our, you know, when as a power user of Writer, for example, like the experience of working with Writer. So there's that lane that I want to go with you on, but I also hear you talking about organizational systems and ultimately the entropy that happens over time, which is a topic that Paul Durwal at Marriott, who was a former guest and was at our AILF, he brought up. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that this is about uh, almost like archaeology of a system, right? Of saying, how did it end up this way, for better and for worse,
Yeah.
right? Um, and this is the mindset that a lot of people are starting to realize they have to take on when it comes to reimagining their systems. Um, and what are you, I mean, like, how are you from inside our product? How are you getting a view into this? You know? And what are you learning? What are the modular takeaways that you can apply?
Yeah, I mean, it's not, I think like archaeology or maybe anthropology, there's a scientific component to it, but there's also a lot of guesswork and best guesses. You know, I have this friend who at this point is actually a professor of archaeology, funny enough, but his background is like he was like this math savant, and he's using mathematical models and machine learning and AI to like diagnose and understand where there will be, for example, archaeological sites based
Mhm.
on various factors and historical conditions, like, oh, a river and at this period, and like using that. And it's a really fascinating with some mixed results, to be clear, but I think it's like a really interesting avenue for using these tools for to help you diagnose what you're seeing. I think in our cases, honestly, the best we can do, obviously we have data, we use customer info, like we talk to customers, we do market research, and these are all signals, but at the end of the day, it's about, at some point you need to make a decision, and you make the best decision you can make given the information you have. And I think what makes certain product organizations good versus, I guess, great is the ability to continuously validate that. I think in the AI space, this is, you know, to the extreme because of the pace the industry is moving. Your assumptions and the decisions you've made could be out of date very, very quickly. And we see this at Writer, we see it at the industry. So, you know, and it's hard because if you're, let's say, a customer of any of the AI shops, or in this case of Writer, especially if it's an enterprise, you might sign up for a service that does X, but very quickly it evolves to do something slightly different or completely different because, you know, the technology has unlocked a completely new set of capabilities. And that's very difficult for organizations that are used for much more stability.
Mhm.
So there's that inherent tension between um, what the technology can do and should do versus the pace of, it's not even the pace, it's the appetite for change of certain organizations. It's not because they're good or bad. I think change is hard for all of us as humans, and it's really about how you usher that change. And I think where I've seen companies that are very successful in AI versus others that are not, is, especially if you use technology in like, let's say, innovative technology, is that you don't just come to the customer and you're like, here's a piece of tech, peace out, good luck.
Yeah.
It's you also work with them on that change management component. We've seen this before with cloud, for example. For
Hmm.
too long, the hyperscalers would tell, historically, they would say, hey, we have this cloud offering, it's great, blah, blah, blah. Here you go. And people at the enterprise would be like, what the hell do I do with this now? Like, how do I actually implement this? How do I roll this out? And I think change management is really, really key component. Now, 20 years later, I don't think there's the questions on cloud. My guess is with AI, it will be much faster than 20 years. But if you don't handhold them through this transformation, you're going to fail. And that's why I think or if you look at the market now, we're seeing amazing successes in consumer and personal productivity, but only a handful of company that is really cracking the enterprise AI space, because it requires a level of commitment that is almost like um, against everything in the DNA of a startup in Silicon Valley.
Yeah. Yeah. As you were talking about this change management challenge and staying ahead of every single new development in AI, I thought about the Ouroboros. Do you know what I'm talking about? The
Hmm.
snake eating its own tail, and how you've got this, let's say 100-year-old company racing to keep up with change. Meanwhile, you've got a technology like Writer or generative or agentic AI evolving to help this enterprise keep up with change, but it's evolving while, it's just like this constant evolution. And that's got to be either a terrifying challenge for you or an energizing or an exhausting challenge. I mean, how do you feel about this type of dynamic?
Yeah, so I think on a personal level, I am a very NCADD kind of person. So to me, the constant pace and change is great, because like it's never dull moment. I think the bigger question is how the customer feels about it. And it's surprising to me, I have to say, I would never have guessed this before I joined Writer. Um, you know, if you look at our customers that we focus on like on the regulated side of the industries, whether it's healthcare, financial services, and such, I was. It's not even pleasantly surprised. I was mind blown away by the appetite for change these companies have. There's always this like joke of like enterprise are these dying dinosaurs and they don't want. Yeah, that's not true. I mean, we sit with them on a daily basis and they understand that they have to change, they want to change, and they're pushing for change. And I actually think that some of the most interesting use cases with AI are not happening in like startups and SMBs and mid-market. They're happening in that global 2000. These are companies that any, you know, marginal change they do in processes have immense implications that could go either way if you don't do this responsibly. But they're understanding that they have to do it to stay relevant, stay competitive, but also provide the expected outcomes that their customers have. Is actually like just was such a big surprise for me. And we sit with these people that have worked in these organizations for a while, and they're like, yeah, we need to do things differently. We are the domain expert, and I'm telling you that the way I do this has to change. And you're like, well, that's really, really inspiring. And also shows a maturity and confidence in their position as a company, that they can do that. And the value of the brand, the value of the product, the value of the people in the organization. So in that perspective, in that sense, like it's less about how we do it at Writer. It's more like we bring the expertise and the know-hows, but also like having the customer push for it is great. I think where it does become a little tricky, to be fair, is if I came to you, Alora, in I don't know, what is it, 15, 12, whatever years ago, and told you, listen, throw away your BlackBerry. I'm going to give you a device, a mobile device that's like a touchscreen. You'll be like, what the hell? Like, I don't want that. I want a keyboard. It's like, I think there's a little bit of that component,
Hmm.
which is when you are in an industry, in a business, and you understand it so well, you naturally have I wouldn't call it biases, but your mind is so geared to that. So it's hard to sometimes step out of the trenches.
Hmm.
And this is where I think there's room for a lot of the work we're doing, which is like, what does it mean if we needed to reimagine the way, let's say, work happens in an enterprise? And sometimes we fail, and a lot of times we succeed. And when we succeed, it's exciting. When we fail, it's also exciting because we learn a lot. But I think that to me is the piece that's like the most invigorating and exciting at the job.
And you've written brilliantly about the hybrid workforce and how it's not just a matter of personal productivity, it's about managing multi-agent systems. And I would like to know where this idea crystallized for you. What was the moment where you said, I need to write this out and kind of bring this to the world so we can ideate off of this concept?
Yeah, I think so. It's a couple of strands that came together, but historically as a PM, you always say no, like I have capacity limits. I have like that's like usually it's kind of like also ties very nicely to that game theory econ background. It's like you have a budget, the budget is time or engineering resources or whatever, and you allocate things against the budget. So basically I went down this like uh thought process. I was like, what does it look like in a world where there's abundance when that constraint is removed? And obviously, in the last what is it year or so, with Ezra Klein and the Abundance book, there's a bunch of people who are thinking about the
Hmm.
construct of abundance. Um, but like this came from a slightly different perspective of what does it mean for me as an individual, that so much of their job is anchored on this idea of scarcity that is baked into the way we do work. Um, And so I just started going through this exercise, and then that's one piece. The other piece is, I worked at a company called Flexport. Flexport is a global freight forwarder that brings tech to freight forwarding. And if you look at the freight forwarding market, one of the reasons there isn't a single player that has more than, let's say, 3 to 4% of the volume of traffic of trade is because they physically cannot run the business. Like these are companies of hundreds of thousands of employees, and they physically cannot manage the headcount at scale. So when you take these two things together, it just clicked to me that in a world where the marginal cost of deploying an agent is going to go to zero, it's already close to it, but it's going to become easier and easier and cheaper. And we see that this idea that agents are machines is actually wrong. Not as in like, I'm not saying they're human, but more that they drift, they misbehave, they have sparks of creativity, sparks of randomness. So I like to call them like a junior intern almost, at least at
Right.
this point. So if I can deploy um, these junior interns in scale, because it costs me almost nothing. So I went de facto from a human that my constraint was like capacity of like the work I can do, to a new constraint, which is my capacity to manage these agents. Now, I think the reality of it is I am not one of those that thinks that humans are going to disappear and AI is going to like kill us all in our sleep. But I think we will have a corporation, and depending on the role and depending on the context and depending on the day, you will be either a manager of humans, a manager of agents, or a manager of hybrid teams. So the reality is every one of us is going to become a manager. And this is, to me, in some ways more scary than the quote unquote AGI discussion, because
Hmm.
as like I'm not scared for my daughter. for example. She will grow in the world where people manage agents. I think, but between someone who's a toddler to me that is becoming way too old, there's a skills gap where it's like, what does it mean for me as an employee to manage? I've never managed. I don't know what it means to manage. Maybe also, managing people will be essentially maybe not different than managing agent. And that is a skills gap that we need to think about as an industry. So that's
Yeah.
on the individual level. Then on the organization level, it raises interesting questions. And this goes back to the Flexport example. So let's say I'm 1,000-person company and I'm killing it. I have great growth. The business is healthy. Now you start deploying agents. Let's say you deploy 1,000, 10,000, let's say 100,000, whatever agents. So let's say 10,000. If you agree with what we just said, you're no longer a 1,000-person company. You just overnight became an 11,000 employee company. That's not the same beast. And any startup can tell you that growing from like 50 to 100 to 500 to 1,000, like all of your processes break. So to me, it's great that as an industry, people talk about what it takes, like the tools to build agents. And that's really important. But at this point, everyone and their mother, daughter, grandchildren has like an agentic framework. I think where the real bottleneck on AI to provide the promise that it can and should is not about how we build agents, is how we scale them, how we do this in a way that the CIO or CISO doesn't come with cold sweat, doesn't wake up with cold sweat at night, and can really manage this fleet of what I would call organic and synthetic agents, like humans and machines, at scale for their organization. And that's like a completely different skill set on the individual and on the org.
Yeah. I was, again, I've been working with Writer on a daily basis since I've started almost 3 years ago. And obviously the experience of working with Writer has evolved, but it was still surprising to me to learn that other people who are using our product or other AI products don't use it in an iterative way, right? They treat it like it's a delivery device instead of, okay, this is cool. Let me give you some feedback on this and work on it in a way. And by the way, can you analyze this session so that way if I want to repeat it again, what's the prompt and things like that, right? And I realized that part of the reason I work with it in such a way, like I intrinsically worked with it in that way, is because I have a writing and editorial
Mm,
background.
mm.
Yeah. So that's a natural business process for me. That's a skill set, a managerial, ultimately, skill set that comes with me because of my role. And it will be a challenge, I think, for the next generation, is learning how do you work in collaboration and externalize feedback, externalize these things. So yeah, on an individual level, I can see what you're saying. And then, man, on an organizational level, it is almost necessitating a military approach to organizing these fleets, right?
So this is like you touch like a sensitive point because this is an ongoing argument in my household. So my wife's a great writer and she has a writing background and a marketing background and I'm not. I had to spend a lot of time and effort to be able to write an email, let alone an essay in English or in Hebrew for that matter. Like growing up to this day, like I was diagnosed with dyslexia, and like writing was not something that came natural to me, and required a lot of effort and blood, sweat, and a lot of tears. And this is like an ongoing debate that we have around what is the impact of AI on the way on writing on that. And I think I have a great argument. My wife might disagree, but like I remember growing up, when I took my, let's say, AP math, I couldn't use a calculator. Or when I wrote an essay, I couldn't use a spell checker. Now, obviously, generative AI is going even, to some extent, it depends on your perspective, it's a bigger leap than that. But I actually think, given where our world is going and what we've been seeing, whether it's social media or tech and others, I actually think AI is teaching us great skill sets that, or will force us to learn skill sets that we haven't yet, which is editorial and critical thinking.
Mhm.
Because if you take everything it says is like the gospel, then there's a problem, because these machines by definition make mistakes. By the way, some would argue even the Bible and the gospel, but that's a separate conversation that I don't want to have right now. But the point here is, I think it requires you to be a critical thinker. So to me, we're essentially turning into editors rather than writers. And yes, that is a skill set. It's a skill set that no one is learning today. It's not there's now in SF the AI school or something like that, and someone asked me, what do you think about sending your daughter there? I was like, yeah, I think it's like a hype, and I don't think that's like but I do think there is an element of how do you interact with the system. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I genuinely believe that the interaction layer, which is writing, is the wrong interaction layer for 99% of the users. The analogy that there's nothing scarier than an empty text box, like
It's true.
ever, or an empty white page. And I think, if you
Mhm.
look at companies like Notion, where you saw them blowing up as a product is when they built a Notion template store, not
Templates.
just like
Mhm.
exploded. I think what you'll probably see, like we are now at the age of kind of like computers, in the sense that the way AI is today is the equivalent of me interacting, instead of like Mac OS, I'm interacting with the terminal. Like
Yes.
most people don't want to interact with the terminal. They want to point and click. They want something very visual, interactive. They want to abstract complexity. And then if you want more complexity, you can go. The other kind of like analogy I have is, and I'm actually, for once, I assume you will, so I'm talking to someone that I assume would remember this, or will know this analogy
Matan
because
is
of your
actually
background.
saying I'm old, but go
No,
ahead.
no,
Yeah.
because of your background, because of your background. I don't know. There used to be this thing called Google. It still exists, Google Advanced Search. So
Uh-huh.
you have like
Yeah.
the simple
Oh, yeah, I
Google,
loved it.
and then Google Advanced Search gives you all this advanced functionality, which is,
Yeah.
by the way, was mostly used by librarians and writers.
Mhm. Yeah.
But like on the surface, 95% of the population, if not more, does not need Google Advanced Search. Like you can do
Right.
enough with the basic, because it's so smart, so good. But then if you need some more nuance, you go to this more complex. I think now what we've done historically is we forced users to interact with the product the way the product wants to interact with it, rather than the way humans interact with it.
Mhm.
And I think we will go through this transformation. I remember when I joined the Ministry of Finance, I was 21. I come to the office, boot up my PC, and I had this thing, weird thing. And by the way, based on your facial expression now, we'll know if you're old or not, based on what I'm about to say.
Okay. Bring
Um,
it.
and I see this thing, this screen loads up in my Windows. It says, IBM Lotus 123.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
I'm old.
and then I was like,
I'm very old.
what the hell is this? And then someone explained to me, it's like, well, it's our operating system inside the
Mhm.
operating system. Basically, it was a means to prevent employees that did not grow up computer native from breaking the computer.
Mhm.
And I think as we think about enterprises also, this goes back to it, is like, these are not like employees that are all like teenagers or younger now. There's people who've been working there for 10, 20, 15, whatever years, people who are older, people who are younger. This idea that people would be able to prompt their way to solutions is bonkers to me. And I think, yes, models are getting better. So they in distilling that. But I think a lot of the time we spend now at Writer is really thinking, okay, how do we distill that? And it goes back to where we started. How do we distill that knowledge, that intrinsic knowledge your organization has from day zero as you build your business? That is the real value, whether it's the people, the processes, and the hierarchies. What in some of my writing I call the orchestration or judgment graph.
Mhm.
and then bring that in so the AI tailors itself for that need. So then you don't need to be like a Pulitzer Prize winning writer to get this machine to do what you need, because it has all this context and understanding of how you think, how the organization thinks, how the organization work. So it kind of like reduces that. So this is like a lot of our time we spend around that thinking, because like, God, like if I need to prompt every time I need an answer, that's really annoying. Like that's, and you know, I use AI in that iterative process as well, because I view it as like a brainstorming machine more than anything
Sure.
else. But it can get very frustrating.
It can be. And it's, I have situations where I need to start from scratch after, all of a sudden, I've got to do the same thing, but now I have to start from scratch again because I need to have a new session because maybe that session there's already like context and memory involved with a completely different scenario, right? So being able to bring the wanting the outcome the same with a little bit of a change in the process would be a fantastic thing, which, not to we can plug our own product, but there are certain solutions that are helping us get there
For sure.
without having to start from scratch, which is fantastic. I want to go to this idea of uh, AI agents need supervision, not just metrics. And I think you touched on that obviously through the orchestration graph and things like that. But I want to challenge that is a challenge to conventional wisdom, which is, AI agents, you just to prove their value, you got to get the metrics going. What is an example of a failure mode, something that looked great on a dashboard, but it was actually drifting off of the rails in terms of supervision?
It's less about, I would say, a specific example. To me, again, I went back to what does it mean to manage like an organization with all these agents running around and humans and hybrid teams. And then we're going to be inundated with all these like signals, like logs, information that these machines throw back at us. And I was like, no human would go through these logs at scale. Like it's not going to
Mm-hmm.
happen. It's not going to work. So there needs to be an abstraction there. Now, it's not that the logs don't matter. What we call observability, they do matter. But we're already seeing this shift today in the industry that pre-AI, we had this like API observability. You had companies, great companies, and they still exist and they're still doing really well, like Datadog, Grafana, whatever, that are showing you like error rates, latency, and so on and so forth. Then AI came, and the understanding was that those things are important, but it's not just about how the API itself is performing, but also the quality of the response, because it's non-deterministic. So if I tell it,
Mm-hmm.
tell me a funny joke, back to back to back, it would probably tell me very different jokes every time. So it's not just about did it respond correct? Did I get like a success from the API layer, but also what is the quality of the response?
Mm-hmm.
And that's like really different, because if you look historically at API companies, they would charge, for example, per usage, per successful usage, which is, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
Stripe. You swipe a card, that's the cost. Now, in a lot of these AI companies, the cost is actually completely separate from was it
Mm-hmm.
successful in the
Yep.
important sense. Um, so then that happened, and then we started caring about time to first token and other quality metrics. Now we're at the third stage, which is like you have all of these agents running around, talking to each other, doing all these things. Like you're going to get so much of that first and second layer information, but that doesn't actually help me manage that fleet that we talked about. Now, I'm going to use an analogy that I don't think is the right analogy fully, but to some extent it gets us there. Jensen, the CEO of NVIDIA, had
Mm-hmm.
this sentence, which is IT is the new HR of agents.
Mm-hmm.
And there's truth to it. But what are the tools? And now, I think the tools of HR today are not built well for scaling an organization. I think scaling an organization of humans is also very difficult, which agents in some sense make it easier, but also harder. So to me, that was the thinking. So, and the statement is not, it's less about metrics, it's observability is not enough. And if observability tells you what happened, what we care about and what we should care about is supervision, which tells you, did the thing that happened, should it have happened, and if so, why? Because I
Hmm.
think that in itself gives you a lot of information on exactly the process you talked about, which is improvement, iteration, refinement of the behavior of the agent over time.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see when we've got workflows going, how we're going to be measuring outcomes against attempts, if you know what I mean. At this
Mm,
point, you know, I think anybody who works with consumer AI tools, sometimes it feels like pulling the arm of a jackpot, right? You put it in, you see what you get. And sometimes it's going to be 3 cherries in a row, and sometimes it's going to just be crap. And it really, sometimes, they do say garbage in, garbage out, but in this particular case, it's same prompt, different response, different, because you've got the randomness. Uh, where do you, I guess, is that? I mean, obviously, that's a problem that you're working on, but what insight are you bringing to that problem or challenge, I should say?
well, I think there's two things that we are looking at and actively working is like, what does it mean to build that supervision layer and the needs of a customer? Because I actually think this is a quote unquote product problem. Rather, this is not a technical problem. Like the data
Mm-hmm.
is there. It's how you package it and make it actionable and useful. And that I think is a big challenge, to be clear. It's not an easy challenge, but it's a big challenge. So that's one piece. The second piece is today, like my or our feeling is that everyone is talking about, is the agent good? Was this agentic system good? I don't know what good means. And the problem is no
Yeah,
one in
what
the
does good
industry
look
knows
like?
what
Mm-hmm.
good. It's not even what good looks like, because I think it's kind of like I can tell you if I get an output if it's good. But to do that in scale, that's different. And I think
Mm-hmm.
one of the attempts, what we're doing now at Writer, and there was a paper that we published a couple of weeks ago, like a first attempt to define a quantitative metrics to what does good look like for an agentic system. And I think, again, this goes back to everyone is so excited about building another way to build another framework to build agents,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't matter if I can't measure, is this good, is this valuable? And I think that's where we need to spend a lot of the time, and that's where we're spending a lot of time as part of that supervision context that we talked about earlier.
How are we spending that time? Is that we're hand in hand with our customers looking and evaluating? Is this against, benchmarks in, the AI industry? Where are we looking for that measure?
So we've defined KPIs that we think are the right things to measure. Now I think it would
Mm-hmm.
be great if the industry as a whole kind of like whether it's to this KPIs or other alliance or like baseline. I think the issue we have here is less about baseline when it comes to, like, actually that's not true what I'm about to say. Um like as a whole we have an issue which is we don't really measure even what humans can do. So like I'll give you an
Mm-hmm.
example. I was sitting with a financial institution and they were complaining to me. We showed them a demo, and the demo, let's say, had like, I don't know, 80% accuracy rate. And they're like, why is it only 80? And I was like, okay. This was like an internal use case for their support, like certified support agents or whatever. And I was like, let's play a game, guys. Can you tell me what's your accuracy rate or hallucination of your human agents? They're like, no. It's like, okay, let's play a game. Let's call 10 times to your customer support center and ask the same questions and see what we get. What do you think you guys will get? And then they're like, I think it would be less than 80%. That's what they said. So like the issue
That's a
here
good
is
reality check. Yeah.
we're comparing agents to computers in a deterministic manner rather than agents to humans in their randomness and mistakes that they make. But the problem is we don't measure a lot of those things. So it's really hard to set a benchmark. So that's why it becomes really, really difficult to benchmark these things. But I also think we don't have the established metrics.
Mm-hmm. And then as we're building this future, right? We're both building a platform to help enterprise leaders reimagine how work is done, and we're trying to convince them to reimagine how work is done. Um, what do you hope will be obvious to leaders that feels radical or maybe even threatening today? What's the shift in mindset that you want to accelerate?
Yeah, I think what will become obvious to us is the window of opportunity for what we can achieve with AI is actually insane in the sense that, like, for the enterprise, not on the technology side, like, it just opens our capabilities to do much more with the same set amount of time. Now, there's two options, which is we do the same output of work, but do it in less time, or we do more work at the same amount of time. So let's say whether you like, I finish my daily work in 1 hour, or I do much more work in 8 hours. I don't know where we're going to land. Like, it depends on who do you want to believe in the quote unquote in the abundance school of thought. But I do think that this would allow us to like unlock completely new set of things. Like, there's things that I just don't enjoy in my job, and now I can use AI to do them, where I can focus on the stuff that I get much more I think I provide more value, I get more personal value to the company. I also think in like a really weird way, and again, this is not a holistic statement about our world, but I think in the context of an office or a work, I actually think AI, especially after the pandemic, after COVID, would bring humans together rather than apart. Because I think a lot of the stuff that we do in a silo with ourselves in front of a computer can probably be, if not fully automated, then accelerated with AI. But there is that intrinsic element of what does it mean to do like a human interaction, human relationship that to this day at least AI cannot replace. So I think funny enough, the bonds between you and your coworkers will actually be strengthened rather than weakened. So like I need to spend less time on a spreadsheet, let's say. So then, yeah, you spend more time maybe brainstorming with the team or stuff like that. So I actually think it's a little counterintuitive, but what I've seen is by my ability to push down that annoying, like let's say it takes me, instead of a week, it takes me 2 hours to write the first draft of, let's say, a strategy doc. I still have like N hours in the day that I need to do work. I can leverage that to meet more of my colleagues, brainstorm, think outside the box. So
Talk through
funny,
the strategy doc. Yeah.
exactly. So in a funny way, even though AI is like people are scared of it, and I understand why, because change is scary. I actually think, in a funny way, it's actually going to bring us as humans closer together, rather
Mhm.
than further apart.
One of the big guardrails that we have as, the human in the loop guardrail, right? And the whole idea of AI slop is coming up. We talk about, well, AI helps me complete the stuff that I really just don't like doing. Do you worry about people being careless because, hey, AI did it, and I'm not, I hate doing it, and therefore I'm not going to be putting as much attention toward
Yes, but
it?
but to me, that's true for almost anything that technology, like, I don't know, like, I was just talking to our engineers actually earlier today. I was driving my car in San Francisco. And we have like self-driving component in it, and you
Yeah.
have your two hands on the steering wheel, and there was this really weirdly positioned turn. We had a red light, car stopped. I was the front of the lane, but there was the green light of the turn was positioned in an angle that the car thought it was my green light.
Mm.
So it almost ran a red light. Um, I paid attention, I braked. Yeah, you still need to be involved. Like at the end of the day, whatever output the AI brings out, it still comes out under your name.
Hmm.
And I think like we are a bit at this free for all stage that everyone is generating slop, but then that would have to change because guess what? The same way that I don't know, like before Excel, accountants can only do so much, but now they have Excel. Yeah, like if you publish garbage, and by publish it doesn't mean if you're a marketer or a strategy dog or whatever, then that's the quality of what you do. To me, it's a tool, and if the tool is not if is misused, it's not the tool's fault, it's the user's fault. Like now that doesn't mean the tool doesn't need like guardrails, the regulation, the safety in place, but if you're now generating garbage and sending it to your CEO and then they fire you because it was garbage, that's not the CEO. Like you had an
That's on
opportunity to
you.
review the
Yeah.
stuff. That's on you as the person who stands behind the product that you bring out there. So I think I don't think AI should or would or does reduce the personal accountability and responsibility we as human have for the stuff we say and the stuff we publish.
If one last question, and then I will let you go about your busy day. Uh, if you could sit down with 100 enterprise leaders tomorrow and get them to truly internalize one insight from everything you've been seeing about orchestration, judgment, and this hybrid workforce, what would it be?
Oh, I don't know. Um, it's a good one. I think the we have customers that do it already, but I think if we can wave a magic wand and make it more of like an industry-wide thing, is the the understanding that this is not a magic like a silver bullet, but also be the patience and willingness to partner. Like, and I think that's true for both sides, for AI companies, but also for these companies together. We are, we're navigating through a new terrain, and that requires really pushing each other and testing each other to the limit with what can and cannot be done. And I think, obviously we all now get slammed with information and whatnot, but if you look at what's happening like in social media around AI, like most of the demos you see there are horseshit, and they don't scale in the enterprise use case. Now, then you come into a call and they're like, well, but I've seen this on Twitter. I was like, okay, like I get it, but that's not reality. That is a highly curated, and you don't run your business on highly curated stuff. Your business is about the exceptions that happen through that. It's not the happy path. It's how you go back from the exceptions to the happy path.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that understanding and coming to it from that position would go a long way for all of us as an industry as well as our customers to be successful.
Matan, is there any question that I haven't asked that you wanted to cover today?
Ooh, yeah. And you haven't asked me about restaurant recommendations or favorite wines, or there's a bunch of those.
Oh, yeah. Um, Not sure how to bring that into enterprise AI framing,
We wine and
but
dine with our enterprise customers all the
that's
time. So
true. We do. That's a big part of the webinar we're doing is Diego saying, look, we've created more capacity for these amazing VIP experiences.
yes, yes.
Uh, but yes, I would love to hear your recommendations. What is your
I
favorite wine?
I put um a constraint on myself. I have certain shops, or whether they're online or offline, that I like to procure wine through. But over the years, I've learned that I put like a fake limit on myself, that when I go there, I don't buy wines over $20,
Oh,
because I think finding good or great wines that are expensive is actually not hard, but it also devastating if you paid a lot of money for a wine that's trash.
that's right.
Now, finding amazing wines at sub $20 is a challenge, and if you find them, you found like a pearl that like stays with you, like a diamond in the rough. So I have once in a while I have a bunch of duds. They're mostly, I would say, good, but sometimes you fall on greats, and it's fun because you feel like almost like you found an indie band on
Yeah.
Spotify or on Bandcamp, and no one knows about them. And it's like, oh, now you're listening to my music 5 years later when
Hmm.
they break out. Or same with authors or books. So that's like that to me is the that's the challenge. It sometimes frustrates my wife because I buy those wines in bulk. So you run like a high risk, high reward
Storage space.
yeah, storage space. But then if you have a bad wine, you're stuck with it. So you need to figure out what to do with it.
No,
But like
you
you
give it to the in-laws.
no,
Uh,
or cook. Although someone once told me you shouldn't cook with wine you're not willing to drink, but that's kind of like the constraint I put on myself. Yeah.
so, do you have a Substack about that?
No, I don't. But I use this app called Vivino, that where I rank my wines. But
It's the
I
good
have
reads of wines.
ish. Well, there's some people who put a lot of efforts to say why they like it. I'm too lazy for that. I just put
Mm,
numerical. But there are some people, exactly, it's the Goodreads. Less funny. Like Goodreads is really funny, some of the
yeah.
reviews. But yeah, and I like to try also things that are off the beaten path. Obviously, living in California, Napa and Sonoma and such, but um, trying wines from countries you never would think of, whether, especially if you're in the U.S., for example. Like, so growing up in the Middle East, where according to the Old Testament, that's the origin of like winemaking, at least one of the first, not origin, but one of the first evidence of winemaking. So wine is very much intrinsic to the culture. So drinking from countries like Lebanon, Turkey,
Hmm.
Greece, obviously Israel, Georgia, to name a few. So I think there's like, you can find really amazing stuff that is really hard to get elsewhere.
Well, between you and Eric Freeman, I think that next writer big all hands, we need to get some curated recommendations on both coasts as
Well,
far
absolutely.
as food and wine is concerned.
I think I might have dug myself in a hole with Eric. I invited him for a cook off on like a meat cook off, but
Ooh,
that's before I knew that he's a former chef, so I might get my
yeah.
my ass handed to me.
Well, I look forward to being in the audience and or tasting jury on that and seeing each other's asses being handed to each other. All right.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. It was great getting to know you and hearing your stories, Matan.